Hey everyone, I'm not the type to tell stories or make videos, but what happened to me? It's so wild, so beyond anything I could have imagined, that I feel like I have to share it. Not for clout or views, but because I need to get this off my chest to see if anyone out there has gone through something similar, or at the very least to show you how bad life can get, and how desperation can push you into the craziest situations. My name's Jake, and up until a few months ago, my life was like a bad movie stuck on repeat. I got laid off from my programming job. Not because I screwed up, just because the company was downsizing. It was the only job I'd had since college, the one thing keeping me afloat in this city. Since then, I've been trying everything to find something new. I sent out hundreds of resumes, went to dozens of interviews, but every door slammed shut. "We'll be in touch," they'd say. "We'll review your application," they'd promise. Then nothing but silence. The anxiety was like an invisible monster, choking me a little more each day. My rent was 2 months overdue. My landlord went from polite texts to annoyed voicemails to straight-up cold threats. My credit cards were maxed out long ago, and I kept getting those lovely emails from the bank warning me about overdue payments. My beat-up old car, the only thing getting me around, was breaking down constantly. Every time I drove, I'd hear weird noises from the engine, like it was groaning right along with me. Everything was piling up at once, and I had no way to fight back. I felt like I was drowning, with no one to throw me a lifeline. I got so desperate that I was mindlessly scrolling through job boards, looking for anything that could bring in some cash. I didn't care if it matched my skills or sounded interesting. I just needed something to survive. That's when I saw this bizarre ad on Craigslist. Night watchman needed for an old warehouse. Pay $500 a night, no experience required. Contact this email. $500 a night. I almost laughed out loud. Who pays that much for a simple gig like that? It had to be shady. Had to be some kind of scam to steal my info or rope me into something sketchy. I was about to scroll past, move on to something more realistic. But then I thought about my landlord's calls, the collection notices, and my empty stomach. I had nothing left to lose. What's the worst that could happen, I told myself. Waste a few hours on an interview? Starving is scarier than that. So, I clicked. The ad only had an email address. I sent a short message asking about the job, attaching an outdated resume that was completely irrelevant to something like this. I didn't expect a reply. But an hour later, I got one. No name, no signature, just meet at the coffee shop on Elm Street at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Wear dark clothes. Red flag. Total red flag. A quiet coffee shop at night, telling me to wear dark clothes. It was straight out of a low-budget horror flick. But there was this weird curiosity I couldn't shake. And in my situation, I knew I couldn't afford to turn down any opportunity, no matter how insane it sounded. I told myself, I'll go, just to see what it's about. Maybe it's some quirky startup's weird interview process. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened to my gut. I wish I'd never replied to that email. But back then, I was just a desperate guy, searching for any light at the end of a pitch-black tunnel. I was ready to take any risk, not knowing that the light was really just a flame from hell, a perfect trap set for someone as broken as me. I arrived at the coffee shop on Elm Street at 7:50 p.m. It was in a quiet part of town, and even at peak hours, the place was practically empty. Just a few people sat in the corners, and the atmosphere was eerily still. I grabbed an empty table, my heart pounding. I kept telling myself this was a mistake, but I couldn't back out now. Right at 8 p.m., the coffee shop door swung open, and an old man walked in. He was dressed in a worn black suit, with white hair and piercing cold eyes. He looked like a character straight out of an old detective movie. He scanned the room, and when his eyes locked on me, he made a beeline for my table. No greeting, no introduction. He just sat down across from me. "You Jake?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, that's me." He didn't say anything else. He just stared, like he was scanning some invisible barcode on me. It wasn't about my skills or experience. His look was sizing up something deeper, My desperation, the exhaustion etched on my face. This kid needs cash, I could almost hear him think. He'll do anything to get out of his mess. After a suffocating silence, he finally spoke, and his question wasn't about work history or problem-solving skills. "You afraid of the dark?" I froze. It was the weirdest interview question I'd ever heard. Was this a trick? Some kind of psych evaluation? I couldn't lie. His eyes felt like they could see right through me. "I don't think so," I said, my voice shaky. "I've worked night shifts before." He nodded like my answer didn't matter. Then he pulled a stack of papers from a briefcase and set it on the table. "This is the contract," he said. "Read it and sign." AE. Contract, no discussion, no explanation. My hands trembled as I picked up the papers. The contract was nearly 20 pages long, but there was a single sheet of paper clipped to the end. Appendix: the rules. I skimmed the contract. It looked like a standard employment agreement at first, but there were some odd clauses. AR, liability section. I'd be responsible for any accidents or incidents during my shift. A confidentiality clause. I couldn't disclose any details about the job or the warehouse. And then, one that sent a chill down my spine. Violation of any rule in the appendix will result in immediate termination of the contract, and all compensation paid will be forfeited. My heart raced. What was going on here? Why would a security job have clauses like that? I glanced at the old man. He sat there, motionless, watching me like he'd seen this reaction 100 times before. Finally, I flipped to the appendix. It was a numbered list of rules, written in stark black ink on white paper. I read the first few, and they made my blood run cold. Rule 1, never turn on the light in the west hallway. Rule 2, if you hear whispering, cover your ears and count out loud to 10. Rule 3, if the office phone rings, never answer it after 1 a.m., and there were more, each one stranger and more unsettling than the last. These weren't normal safety protocols. They read like warnings from another world. I looked up at him. "What are these rules?" "They're the rules of the job," he said, his voice flat. "If you don't want to follow them, there's no contract." I stared at the contract, then back at his icy eyes. I could walk away right now. I could chalk this up to some weird prank and forget it. But then I thought of my debts, my empty stomach, $500 a night. That number outweighed every fear I had. It was my last shot at salvation. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'm in." He didn't smile or look pleased. He just handed me a pen and pointed to the signature line. I signed my name, feeling like I'd just made a deal with the devil. I had no idea that in that moment I'd crossed a threshold I could never uncross. He stood up, handed me a key and a map and said, "Good luck, kid." It didn't sound like a wish. It sounded like a warning. I clutched the key and the map, watching the old man in the black suit walk out of the coffee shop. The glass door slammed shut behind him, leaving me alone with a whirlwind of thoughts. The contract, those bizarre rules, and that unreal paycheck. I asked myself 100 times if I could just turn around and walk away. But every time the image of those overdue bills flashed in my mind, I had no choice. I'd already gone all in on this gamble. The warehouse was at the end of a desolate industrial road, far from the city center. It was a massive, crumbling structure, like something time had forgotten. The roof was rusted, the windows shattered, and not a single light illuminated the place. Only the faint glow of the moon cast an eerie sheen, making the building look even more ominous. A chain-link fence, torn in spots, surrounded it with a heavy iron gate that the old man had marked on the map. I unlocked the gate and stepped inside. The metal creaked loudly in the silent night. A cold, unsettling feeling washed over me. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I approached the main door, a hulking slab of steel. When I pushed it open, it let out a piercing screech, like some beast waking from a long slumber. Inside, the darkness was absolute. I turned on my phone's flashlight, its weak beam barely cutting through the void. The space was cavernous, filled with towering shelves, dusty forklifts, and stacks of old wooden crates. The air was thick, damp and reeked of mold and rusted metal. The loneliness was suffocating. I felt like a tiny speck in an endless abyss of shadows. Following the map, I found the security office in a corner of the warehouse. The door was already open. Inside was an old wooden desk, a worn-out swivel chair, and a broken CCTV monitor. On the desk sat a larger, brighter flashlight and a piece of paper pinned to the wall. It was the list of rules. My name, Jake, was scrawled at the top in messy handwriting. I grabbed the new flashlight and switched it on. Its stronger beam lit up the room more clearly. I started reading the rules again, this time carefully. They weren't a joke anymore. Each one felt like a warning, a taboo. Rule 1. Never turn on the light in the west hallway. That path belongs to the dark. Rule 2. If you hear whispering, cover your ears and count out loud to 10. Those voices aren't meant for human ears. Rule 3. If the office phone rings, never answer it after 1 a.m. If it rings on its own, count the rings. If it rings more than 3 times, leave. Rule 4. Check the east windows regularly. If you see any smudges appear, wipe them off immediately. Rule 5. If any crate is out of place, note its position and move it back. No one else is allowed in here. But you don't. Rule 6. Do not bring any internet-connected devices. They don't like being watched. I read each rule over and over. These weren't standard job instructions. They felt like commandments from some demonic ritual. I tried to find logic in them, but there was none. My heart pounded harder, and sweat trickled down my back. I told myself this was just part of the job, a test of compliance. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Why count out loud if I heard whispering? Why not answer the phone after 1 a.m.? Was someone or something living in this warehouse? I stepped out of the office, flashlight in hand, and started my first patrol. The space was so vast it felt like a labyrinth with no exit. I tried not to think about the rules, but they kept circling in my head, especially the first one. Never turn on the light in the west hallway. Where was this hallway? I found it. A narrow, pitch-black corridor with no windows. I aimed my flashlight into it, but the beam seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. I had the unshakable feeling that something was standing at the far end waiting for me. I turned away and patrolled other areas. The warehouse was dead silent except for the sound of my footsteps. I tried to reassure myself. There's nothing here, Jake. It's just a normal job. But another voice in my head whispered back, these rules exist for a reason. And that's when it hit me. This job wasn't about guarding the warehouse, it was about keeping something inside. The first night dragged on with surprising dullness. After the initial anxiety, everything went quiet. Just the ticking of the clock in the security office and the faint whistle of wind slipping through cracks in the walls. I patrolled a few, more times, but nothing happened. I started convincing myself that the rules were just a prank, a test to see if I'd take the job seriously. I even considered flipping on the light in the west hallway, but an invisible dread stopped me cold. By around 3 a.m., my guard was down. Sleepiness hit hard and I slumped into the creaky swivel chair. Nothing's happened all night, I muttered to myself. $500 to sit here and stare at dust. I leaned my head on the desk, half dozing, when I accidentally knocked over a metal mug. Clang! The sound cut through the silence, sharp and jarring. I snapped awake, instantly aware that something had changed. The quiet was gone. In its place came a faint rhythmic noise from somewhere in the darkness. Scrape, creak. I shot to my feet, gripping the flashlight tightly. The sound was coming from the west hallway, the one I was forbidden to light up. This wasn't the wind or some scampering rat. It was distinct, like metal dragging slowly across concrete, deliberate and heavy. Scrape, creak, scrape, creak. I stared into the pitch-black hallway. My heart pounded in my chest. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I should have done what I was told. Stayed in the office, waited for the noise to stop. But curiosity overpowered my fear. It's just something that fell, I told myself, trying to stay calm. I'll check it out and come right back. I stepped out of the office, aiming the flashlight toward the hallway. Its weak beam only reached a few feet. As I crept closer, the sound grew clearer. Scrape, creak, scrape, creak. It sounded like something with legs, but not footsteps, more like someone dragging a metal limb. I held my breath, listening. Then suddenly the noise stopped. A suffocating silence swallowed the space. I stood frozen, waiting. I swept the flashlight across the hallway's darkest corners, and then, at the far end, the beam caught something. A flicker, a shadowy figure gone in an instant so fast it felt like a hallucination. I rubbed my eyes, aimed the light again, but there was nothing, just endless darkness. I stood there, trembling. Had I imagined it? Was I so exhausted I was seeing things? I tried to convince myself, but a chill ran down my spine. That fleeting image lingered in my mind. It wasn't human. It was too tall, too thin, and it moved in a way that felt wrong. I turned and bolted back to the office. The wooden door slammed shut behind me, and I leaned against it, gasping for air. This wasn't a joke anymore. Those rules weren't meaningless. Something was here, something not human, and I, for a few $100, had signed a contract to watch over it. After that terrifying moment in the west hallway, sleep was the last thing on my mind. Fear had completely chased away my exhaustion. I spent the rest of the night patrolling, but now every little sound made me jump. The creak of a door, the whistle of wind through the cracks, even the thump of my own heartbeat. I stayed as far from the west hallway as I could, swearing to myself I'd never go near it again. I told myself I just had to survive this one night, grab my $500 and get the hell out of here for good. But a nagging voice in my head whispered, if it wanted you gone, it would have made sure of it. It wants you here. The next morning, as the faint sunlight filtered through the broken windows, the terror of the night seemed to fade. The daylight gave me a sense of safety, like I'd been brought back to life. I returned to the security office, ate an energy bar, and studied the map to plan for the next shift. I needed to figure something out, a clue, an explanation for what I'd seen and heard. I couldn't just sit here waiting for more horrifying things to happen. I decided to explore the warehouse carefully, step by step. I started near the security office, shining my flashlight on the old wooden crates and rusty forklifts. For about 2 hours, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It gave me a sliver of reassurance, but deep down, I knew this calm was only temporary. Then, at the end of a deserted hallway, I found something not marked on the map. An old control room. Its rusted iron door took all my strength to push open. Inside, everything was coated in a thick layer of dust. There was an ancient control desk, a few rotting chairs, and a blank computer monitor, alongside some mysterious machines I couldn't identify. I aimed my flashlight at the monitor. It was caked in grime, with words scratched into the dust. There's no one here. A shiver ran through me. Who wrote this? The last security guard? Or something else? I tried wiping the dust off the screen, and an odd sensation crept over me, like I was being watched. I spun around, but there was nothing behind me. Then I noticed an old security camera perched on a box. It looked long broken, probably discarded. But for some inexplicable reason, I felt compelled to pick it up. The camera was heavy and ice cold. I pressed the power button, and to my shock, a tiny green light flickered on. I set the camera on the desk. Suddenly, the old computer monitor flared to life. It wasn't showing footage from the camera I was holding. It was from another one, somewhere else in the warehouse. The image was grainy, flickering wildly. A line of green text blinked on the screen. They're getting closer. I flinched, dropping the camera. It hit the floor with a loud crash, and the monitor went black. I scrambled to pick it up and tried turning it on again, but it was dead. I'd seen it with my own eyes, though. That message. They're getting closer. Who? And closer to what? A wave of dread washed over me. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. The rules, the noises, and now this old camera. They were all connected. I couldn't deny it any longer. Instinctively, I felt something watching me. I spun around, and my flashlight beam landed on an old crate, etched into the dust. On its surface was an image, a face but not a human one. It was crude, with large round eyes and a wide gaping mouth. Simple but chilling enough to make my skin crawl. I realized this wasn't a normal security job. I wasn't guarding property, I was guarding a secret. A secret about something living in this warehouse, something with a purpose I didn't understand. And for a few $100 I'd become part of it. I no longer believed I could survive just by following the rules. I needed to uncover the truth. I had to find out what happened here. What happened to the guard before me. I had to figure out who or what was living in the darkness and why it wanted me here. I left the old control room, the eerie feeling still clinging to me. The words "they're getting closer" echoed in my head like a curse, a warning from some unseen presence. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer, but I couldn't just walk away either. The $500 a night was the only thing keeping me tethered to this place. Beyond that, though, a reckless curiosity had taken hold. I had to uncover the truth behind these bizarre events. I needed to know who they were and why those rules existed. Back in the security office, I sank into the creaky old chair. My phone, which I was allowed to carry since it had no internet connection, sat on the desk. I picked it up, and a notification popped up. A text from an unknown number, no name attached. Just one word: careful. My heart raced. Who sent this? My employer? No way. The old man didn't seem like he cared about my safety. Someone outside who mistyped? That didn't add up either. I tried calling the number back, but an automated voice droned, "The number you have dialed is not in service." Less than a minute later, another text came through. This one gave a new rule, one that wasn't in the appendix the old man had handed me. If you hear your name, never answer. Got it? A chill ran through me. Got it? It didn't feel like advice. It felt like a command, a warning from someone who'd been in my shoes. It was as if someone or something was watching me, not from outside the warehouse, but from inside, or worse, right beside me. I thought of the crates that had been moved, the noises, and that shadow that flickered in the west hallway. My anxiety turned to raw terror when a third text arrived. If you see someone at the window, don't look. Outside. No matter if they knock or call your name, don't look. Each message was a piece of a horrifying puzzle. They weren't just rules. They hinted at specific dangers I'd face. Who was sending these? Was it the previous guard, trapped here before me? Or something else? Something not human? I checked my phone again, scrolling through older messages. Nothing but spam and ads. No trace of prior conversations. That number seemed to exist solely to text me. A sense of helplessness and fear swallowed me whole. I started to feel like I was caught in a deadly game. The rules, the texts, they were all part of it. And I, in my desperation, had become a pawn. I glanced around, every shadow now a potential threat. The wind howled outside, sounding too much like whispering. I quickly covered my ears and counted out loud to 10, just as the rules instructed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each number was a reminder that I was in real danger. I couldn't kid myself anymore that this was all in my head. Something was here, and it was waiting for me to slip up. I started thinking, could the texter be the previous guard? Did they escape? Or were they still trapped trying to warn me? I looked at the rule sheet again. There were faint smudges like someone had tried to wipe something away. Had the last guard attempted to leave a message for whoever came next? I glanced at the office window. It was pitch black outside. I had the unshakable feeling that someone, or something, was standing out there. A cold dread crept down my spine. Another text buzzed in. Don't look outside. No matter what you hear, don't look. Sweat poured off me. My eyes locked onto the phone screen, and I knew there was no turning back. I'd stepped into a game with rules I didn't understand, and my life was on the line. After those cryptic texts, Sleep was impossible. I spent the rest of the night pacing the office, eyes glued to my phone, waiting for another message. Every second dragged like it was weighed down with lead. It felt like a twisted game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse. I tried to make sense of the rules, but they were too bizarre. If something could send me texts, why not just tell me what was going on? Unless it wanted me to mess up. Around 2 a.m., when the warehouse's silence was at its peak, I heard something. Not the dragging metal or howling wind this time. Footsteps, clear, steady, and coming from outside. Thud, thud, thud. They weren't human footsteps. They were too heavy, too slow, like something massive was dragging itself along. I held my breath, listening. The steps stopped right outside the office window. My instinct screamed to look, to see what was out there, but then I remembered the latest text. If you see someone at the window, don't look outside. No matter if they knock or call your name, don't look. My heart pounded in my chest. I pressed my back against the wall, fighting the urge to glance at the window. I could feel something standing just beyond the glass. A cold, oppressive presence filled the room like an invisible weight pressing down on me. Then came the knocking. Tap. 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 It wasn't a normal knock. It sounded like bone rapping against glass, sharp and chilling. The knock stopped, and a voice followed. Not a voice, but a distorted whisper, barely audible. It repeated my name. Jake. Jake. Clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block it out. I muttered the numbers just as the rules instructed. 1, 2, 3. I fought to drown out that eerie voice, but it echoed in my mind. A cold breath seemed to graze the back of my neck. Something felt like it was standing right behind me, even though I knew I was alone. I kept counting, and the voice kept calling my name. My curiosity was starting to overpower my fear. I wanted to turn around to see what was behind the glass. I needed to know what it was. Was it the previous guard, or something far worse? I reached 10, and the knocking, the whispering, it all stopped. A suffocating silence blanketed the room. I stood there panting and slowly turned around. Nothing. The window was still shut, the darkness unbroken. Relief washed over me, but then I noticed something. On the window, right at eye level, was a handprint. It wasn't human. It had 3 fingers, each tipped with a long, sharp claw that had scratched through the grime on the glass. The print was larger than my hand, the fingers unnaturally long. It was black, like it was made of soot or mud. I shuddered. There was no mistaking it. This was proof. Proof that what I'd seen and heard wasn't in my head. Something was alive, in this warehouse, and it could get to me. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the handprint. I needed evidence. I needed to show someone what I was dealing with. Then I turned away, realizing this wasn't a normal job. This was a fight for survival. I had to make it through the night. I had to uncover the truth, and I knew I wasn't safe anymore. I didn't trust anything in this place, not even myself. I wasn't sure if I could trust the rules or if they were just a way for it to toy with me. Was the person texting me a friend or a foe? Could I even escape this place? I'd gone too deep into this maze, and I didn't know if there was a way out. I stood there staring at the handprint on the window, my body trembling with a bone-deep chill. Every shred of doubt had vanished. The shadow in the west hallway wasn't a hallucination. The footsteps weren't the wind, and this handprint was undeniable proof. Something was here, something sentient, something that could interact with this world. And it knew my name. I bolted back to the office, locked the door, and barricaded myself inside. What now? I couldn't escape. Whatever was outside was even scarier than what was in here. But I couldn't just sit and wait either. I needed answers. I needed to know why these rules existed and who or what they were. I started searching the security office. It was the only place that felt remotely safe. I flipped through papers on the desk, rummaged through drawers, finding nothing but some crumpled notes, a dull pencil, and an empty pack of cigarettes. Nothing tied to the bizarre things I'd experienced. Then I noticed a faint smudge on the floor under the desk like someone had tried to hide something. I aimed my flashlight at it and realized it was a small wooden box tucked beneath a floorboard. I tried prying the board loose, but it was stuck. After a few minutes of struggling, I grabbed an old metal rod and forced it open. Inside the box was an old yellowed journal. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It belonged to someone who'd been here before, another guard. I opened it and started reading. The first few pages were mundane, just logs of shifts. But as I read on, the entries turned chilling. The previous guard had gone through the same things I had. He'd heard the noises, seen the shadows, and been given those strange rules, but he couldn't handle it. He'd tried to fight back, to uncover the truth. Day 15, he wrote. I heard whispering in the west hallway. It wasn't normal, whispering. It was like a curse, a call for my name. I didn't cover my ears. I listened, and I felt something invading my mind. I ran, but it's still in my head. I kept reading, the horror growing with every word. Day 20, he wrote. They called my name, a voice from outside the window. I looked out, I saw... No, I can't describe it, I can't draw it. It's not something from this world. It had no shape, no color, just a massive black shadow, and it knew I saw it. The journal wasn't just a story. It was a warning. Don't ever forget, he wrote. These rules aren't to keep us safe. They're to keep them from getting out. They're here. They're right here. I flipped to the final page. His handwriting was frantic, scrawled like he was in a panic. They found me. I broke a rule. I called their name back, and they came. I don't know if I'll get out of here. If someone finds this journal, run. Don't stay. Never come back. I dropped the journal, my hands shaking. It all made sense now. The previous guard didn't escape. He was taken. And now I was in the same trap. These rules weren't for my protection, they were to control whatever was in here. I glanced at the window again. The night still enveloped the warehouse, but I didn't feel alone anymore. Something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I couldn't just sit here anymore. I had to find a way out. I slammed the journal shut, dread swallowing me whole. The previous guard's words weren't just a story, they were a warning, a last testament from someone who'd lost their fight against something unseen. I understood now why the rules existed. They weren't to keep me safe, they were to keep them contained. And now I was in more danger than ever. I spent the rest of the night poring over the journal, searching for any clue, any weakness in them. It detailed the noises, the fleeting shadows, the broken rules. The guard before me had tried to resist, to uncover the truth, but he'd failed. He'd been taken. And now, I was in the same trap. Escape wasn't an option. I couldn't call. The police, the contract forbade me from revealing anything about this place. Besides, who'd believe me? I'm stuck in an abandoned warehouse with something supernatural. They'd think I was crazy. My only choice was to survive the night. On the second night, I stayed as alert as I could. I stared at the broken CCTV monitor, trying to read non-existent words. I patrolled, but this time fear didn't grip me. Instead, a cold determination took over. I wasn't going to be a victim. Around 3 a.m., when the warehouse's silence was thickest, I heard something. Not footsteps or groans this time. A voice. It echoed inside my head. Jake? I froze. No way, I muttered. It was a woman's voice, soft and sweet like a lullaby. Jake, I'm here. My heart pounded. The voice was too familiar. It sounded exactly like my mother's. Jake, my boy. I nearly broke down. It couldn't be. No, I whispered. It's impossible. My mom had been gone for years, but the voice was so real, so achingly familiar, like the lullaby she used to sing when I was a kid. Jake, come to me. I'm in the west hallway. I stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to see her, to hold her. But a part of me screamed, don't trust it, it's a trap. I remembered the texted rule. If you hear your name, never answer. But this wasn't just my name. It was a plea, a call, from the person I loved most. I stood there, trembling. My mother's voice echoed louder in my head, no longer a call but a command. Jake, come here now. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted out of the office, sprinting toward the west hallway. I'd broken a rule. I'd answered. I'd believed. I plunged into the pitch-black corridor. The flashlight's weak beam barely pierced the darkness. I ran, heart-pounding, hearing whispers, groans, and eerie laughter. But I didn't care. I just wanted to reach my mother's voice. I stopped, gasping for air. The hallway was still dark, empty. I turned around and saw it. A shadow. Not human. Too tall, too thin, without a clear shape. It was like a void in reality. A massive black silhouette moving toward me. Jake. My mother's sweet voice came from it. I screamed and ran. I didn't care about the money anymore. I just wanted out. I raced to the main door, but it was locked. I yanked at it, desperate, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back and the shadow was right behind me. I stumbled, falling to the ground. The flashlight slipped from my hand, and darkness swallowed me. I heard ragged breathing, scratching, and low moans. Then a voice, not my mother's. It was distorted, grotesque, echoing inside my skull. He tricked you, I screamed again. I didn't understand. Who was he? My employer? The previous guard? Or something else? My mind couldn't process it. I just wanted out. I tried to stand, but something grabbed my leg. It was cold, hard, and reeked of decay. I screamed once more. I didn't know where I was anymore. All I knew was that I'd broken a rule, and now I was paying the price. The voice in my head, a distorted, guttural whisper that wasn't the sweet voice of my mother, echoed the words that chilled me to my core. He lied to you. The truth of it hit me with the force of a physical blow. The old man, the contract, the rules, even the seemingly helpful text messages, it was all a trap. I had been playing a game I couldn't win, and with one fatal mistake, I had fallen for the oldest trick in the book. There was no mother. There was no escape in answering. I had just opened the door for it. The thing that had called out to me from the darkness was now a reality. A bone-chilling cold wrapped around my ankle, a grip so firm it felt like it would snap my leg. It was not a hand. It was a tangle of something hard and sharp, like rusted wire wrapped around an old, petrified root. A foul, earthy smell of rot and damp earth filled my nostrils. I screamed, a desperate, animalistic sound that was lost in the vast, echoing space of the warehouse. I kicked and thrashed, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. My mind was screaming, "Get out, get out, get out!" With a final, desperate heave, I broke free. The grip tore at my skin, leaving deep, burning scratches on my leg. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest, and without a second thought, I bolted. The warehouse was no longer a quiet, spooky place. It was a labyrinth of pure, unadulterated fear. My flashlight, which had fallen from my grasp, lay on the floor, its weak beam casting a useless circle of light on the concrete as I ran. I was blind, running through a minefield of forgotten objects. I slammed into a metal shelf, sending a cascade of rusty cans crashing to the floor. The sound was deafening, a horrible symphony of terror that seemed to mock my flight. Behind me, I could hear it. The sound of its movement was not a run, but a dragging, scraping sound that was somehow faster than any human sprint. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. It was the sound of a heavy body being pulled across a rough surface, punctuated by the clatter of loose metal as it swept past the shelves. The sound was getting closer. I could feel its presence, a pressure in the air, a drop in temperature that sent shivers down my spine. I was no longer running from a shadow. I was running from a predator. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop. I weaved through aisles of stacked boxes, praying I would find the exit. I could hear distorted whispers in the air, not from my phone, but from the very walls of the warehouse itself. "Jake, you can't run. We're waiting. Just give up." The voices were a cacophony of malice, but my mind had one goal: escape. I finally saw it. The massive steel door at the front of the warehouse. It looked a million miles away. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the fiery pain in my muscles. The dragging sound was now right behind me. I could feel the cold air of its presence on the back of my neck. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and in the dim light filtering through a broken window, I saw a glimpse of it. It was tall, incredibly tall, a black void that seemed to absorb the light around it. It moved in a jerky, unnatural way, its limbs elongated and twisted. This is it, I thought. This is where I die. I reached the door. The large metal handle was cold and slick with a strange, oily residue. I fumbled with it, my trembling hands unable to get a grip. The scraping sound stopped. The air around me grew impossibly cold. I could hear a wet, raspy sound like something trying to breathe through a damaged throat. It was right behind me. I could feel its hot, foul breath on my neck. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I slammed my entire body against the door. The handle twisted. The heavy lock clicked open. I threw the door open and stumbled out into the night. The cool night air hit me, a welcome shock to my burning lungs. I didn't stop to look back. I ran. My shoes clattered on the gravel of the parking lot, and I didn't slow down until I reached the main road. I kept running down the empty street, the neon lights of the city glowing faintly in the distance. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until my legs buckled beneath me and I collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for air. I lay there on the cold asphalt, the sound of my ragged breaths the only thing I could hear, the terror still coursing through my veins. The image of the black, twisted form was burned into my mind. I was alive. I had escaped. But at what cost? As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of my situation hit me. My clothes were torn, my hands were scraped and bleeding, and my leg throbbed with a fiery pain. I felt around in my pockets. My wallet was still there, my car keys. But my phone, the phone with the texts, with the picture of the three-fingered handprint, it was gone. I must have dropped it in the chaos of my escape. The evidence, the proof, all of it was gone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had come to this place for money, but in the end, I had run without a second thought. My life was more important than any amount of cash. My desperation for survival had completely overshadowed my desperation for wealth, and I had survived, but I had lost everything else. The evidence of what had happened was gone. The only thing left was the memory and the trauma. I pushed myself up, my body aching with every movement. I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't call anyone. I was alone out on an empty street with a story no one would believe. The feeling that something was still with me, that the thing in the warehouse had somehow managed to touch me, was a creeping dread that I knew would never leave. I began to walk slowly at first, then picking up my pace. My life had changed forever in that warehouse. The desperation that had led me there was gone, replaced by a new kind of fear. I was not just running from the warehouse anymore. I was running from the memory of what was inside it. I was a survivor, but I was also a changed man, and I knew deep down that this was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a new one. The real terror was just starting. I survived. I made it out of that hellish place, but the moment I stepped onto the street, I knew I hadn't truly escaped. The cold air that hit my face wasn't a breath of fresh air. It was a shiver of dread that had followed me from the warehouse. I ran until my lungs burned, until I collapsed in a gasping, sobbing heap on the sidewalk. My clothes were torn. My hands and legs were a mess of scratches and bruises, but the worst of the damage wasn't on the outside. It was the terror that had taken root in my mind. The next few days were a blur. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. I was too scared. I spent the night in a cheap, rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, not daring to close my eyes. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window sounded like the scraping and dragging I had heard in the warehouse. I was a man on the run, a man haunted by a ghost I couldn't see, a monster that had latched onto me with a grip far stronger than the one that had torn at my leg. When I finally made it back to my apartment, I barricaded the door. I shoved a chair under the doorknob, I put boxes in front of the windows, and I sat in the corner of my living room clutching a baseball bat. I didn't care about money anymore. The debt, the eviction notices, they seemed trivial compared to the sheer, unadulterated fear I felt. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my apartment. I was a prisoner, but my jailer was an unseen entity, a shadow that lurked just beyond my sight. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. I told myself it was just a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by extreme stress. But then the little things started happening, the subtle things that chipped away at my sanity. A sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature in the middle of a warm room. The sound of something clicking in the darkness of my closet. The way my reflection in the mirror seemed to linger for a split second longer than it should have. The sounds grew bolder. One night I was woken up by a faint scratching at my front door. My heart pounded against my ribs as I listened. It wasn't a normal scratch. It was a slow, deliberate scrape, like a long, sharp nail being dragged across the wood. I crept to the door, my baseball bat held tight, and pressed my ear against it. The scratching stopped. A moment later, I heard a wet, raspy sigh from the other side, a sound I had come to know all too well. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, paralyzed by fear, waiting for it to go away. The terror wasn't just physical. It was digital. My old phone, the one with the pictures and the texts, was gone. I had to buy a new one, a cheap, generic flip phone from a convenience store. It was meant to be a clean slate. But a few days after I got it, a text message came in. Good. My blood ran cold. The number was different. It was an unknown number, and when I tried to call it, it was disconnected. But the style was the same lack of punctuation, the same cryptic simplicity. I frantically deleted the message and turned off my phone, but a few hours later I got another one. You're home. It knew where I was. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The horror wasn't confined to that warehouse, it had followed me. I wasn't running from a place. I was running from a thing, and it was now with me. It was playing with me, a new game with new rules, and I was already losing. The ultimate bone-chilling proof came a few nights later. I was sitting at my laptop staring blankly at a movie, trying to distract myself. A small notification popped up in the corner of my screen. A file from my old phone was being synced to my cloud account. I had forgotten about it. It was the picture I had taken of the three-fingered handprint on the warehouse window. I didn't want to open it, but an insatiable curiosity, a morbid need to know, forced me to click. The picture was there. The dark glass, the smudged grime, and the perfectly formed three-fingered handprint. But there was something else. A second picture had been saved right next to it. It was a distorted image, taken from a strange angle. It was a selfie, the thing's selfie. It was a blurry, grayscale image, but I could make out the faint shape of the three-fingered handprint on the glass in the foreground. And in the background, a blurry, terrified figure was running away from the window. It was me. I looked closer, my breath catching in my throat. In the reflection of the glass, a dark, elongated form was clearly visible, standing right behind me. It was too tall, too thin to be a human. It was the same shadow I had glimpsed in the warehouse. It was the same thing that had grabbed my leg. And it was there, in my reflection, as I ran. The selfie proved that it wasn't just a physical creature. It could manipulate technology. It could take a picture and it could send it to me. It wasn't just a monster in a warehouse. It was a hunter, and I was its prey. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. The screen went black, and I saw my own reflection, my face pale and horrified. And for a brief, agonizing moment in the blackness of the screen, I saw something else. A flicker of movement in the background, a tall, dark shape standing right behind me, too tall to be a man. I screamed. I was not free. I had not escaped. I was carrying the monster with me. It had chosen me, and it would not let me go. The game was far from over. It had only just begun. The real terror was now. It was in my home, it was in my phone, it was in my mind. I got to the coffee shop on Elm Street at 7:50 p.m. It was in a quiet, almost desolate part of town, and even at rush hour it was surprisingly empty. There were only a few people sitting in the corners, and the atmosphere was strangely silent. I sat down at an empty table, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept telling myself this was a mistake, but I couldn't turn back. At exactly 8:00 p.m., the coffee shop door opened, and an old man walked in. He wore a dark, outdated suit with white hair and sharp, cold eyes. He looked like a character straight out of a classic detective movie. His gaze swept the room, and when his eyes landed on me, he walked straight to my table. Without a word of greeting, he sat down across from me. "Are you Jake?" he asked, his voice low and dry. I nodded, trying to appear calm. "Yes, that's me." He said nothing more. He simply stared at me, as if scanning an invisible barcode. His eyes weren't evaluating my experience or skills. They were looking for something else. He was looking at the desperation in my eyes, the exhaustion on my face. This kid needs money. I could almost read his thoughts. This kid will do anything to get out of this. After a suffocating silence, he finally spoke, and his question was not about work experience or problem-solving skills. "Are you afraid of the dark?" I was stunned. This was not a question I had ever been asked in a job interview. I didn't know how to answer. Was it a trick question? A psychological test? I couldn't lie, as I felt he could see right through me. I don't think so," I replied, my voice a little shaky. "I've worked night shifts before." He nodded as if my answer didn't matter. He took a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "This is the contract," he said. "You can read and sign." A contract. There was no further discussion, no explanation. I took the folder, my hands trembling. The contract was nearly 20 pages long, but a single A4 sheet was stapled to the end. It was titled, "Appendix the Rules." I quickly scanned the contract. It seemed to be a standard employment agreement, but with a few unusual clauses. The personal responsibility clause. I would assume all risks of accidents or incidents that occurred during my shift. The confidentiality clause. I was not allowed to disclose any information about the job or the warehouse. And finally, a clause that sent a shiver down my spine. Violation of any rule in the appendix will be considered an immediate termination of the contract, and all paid compensation will be forfeited. My heart pounded harder. What was going on here? Why would a security guard job have such strange terms? I looked up at the old man across from me. He sat there silently, watching me, as if he were used to these reactions. Finally, I turned to the appendix. It was a list of numbered, bulleted rules written in black ink on white paper. I read through the first few lines and they sent a chill down my spine. Rule 1. Never turn on the lights in the west hallway. Rule 2. If you hear whispering, cover your ears and count loudly to 10. Rule 3. If there is a call to the security office, never pick up after 1 a.m. If the phone rings more than 3 times, leave. And there were many more, each one stranger and more incomprehensible than the last. These were not normal safety rules. They were like commandments from another world. I looked up at him. "What are these rules?" "Those are the rules of the job," he replied, his voice flat. "If you don't want to follow them, there is no contract." I looked at the contract again, then at his cold, sharp eyes. I could walk away now. I could write this off as a prank and forget about it. But then I thought about my debt, about my empty stomach. $500 a night. That number was bigger than any fear inside me. It was my last salvation. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'll take it." He didn't smile or show any sign of satisfaction. He simply handed me a pen and pointed to the line where I needed to sign. I signed my name, feeling as though I had just signed a contract with a demon. I didn't know it then, but in that moment I had stepped through a door from which there was no return. He stood up, handed me a key and a map. "Good luck, my boy," he said, and the words didn't sound like a blessing, but a warning.